What really makes someone a top performer, when the pressure is really on? Is it all about having a certain body type? That's what we're digging into today. Does our physical build actually determine if we can succeed in the toughest jobs out there? Let's find out. I mean, we've all done it, right? You see someone who just looks the part and you think, yep, they've got it. But is there actually a perfect mold for success? Can you really tell how well a soldier will perform just by looking at them? Well, let's see what the science has to say about that. So, to get to the bottom of this, we're going to look at a fascinating study that put this whole myth under the microscope. Researchers went straight to a group of people who are constantly pushed to their absolute limits: military cadets. Specifically, cadets in the Brazilian Air Force. They wanted to see if they could find a real, scientific link between basic body measurements and how well these cadets actually performed. All right, so who are we talking about here? At the center of this whole thing are 155 cadets. That's 141 men and 14 women, and they all volunteered to have their physical limits tested and measured. And let me tell you, they were about to face some seriously tough challenges. And the researchers, they did not pull any punches. They came up with two completely different and frankly brutal tasks to really see what these cadets were made of. The idea was to push both their physical endurance and their more specialized skills right to the absolute edge. Okay, so first up on the agenda was a 12-kilometer foot march. Now, for perspective, that's about 7.5 miles, a pretty long haul, but believe me, the distance, that was only the beginning of the challenge. Because on top of that distance, each cadet had to lug around roughly 25 kilograms, that's over 55 pounds of gear. We're talking the full shebang: a heavy backpack, a tactical vest, and their weapon. This was a straight-up brutal test of their endurance under a heavy load. So after that grueling march, you'd think they'd get a break, right? Nope. They faced a totally different kind of beast: a 150-meter swim. That's about 3 lengths of a semi-Olympic pool. Sounds tough, sure, but maybe manageable? Well, there was a pretty big catch. Yeah, the catch was they had to do the swim fully clothed, in their combat utility uniform. We're talking boots, jacket, the whole 9 yards. Can you imagine? This completely changes the game. A swim becomes a desperate fight for survival against all that weight and drag. And just to give you an idea of how hard this was, 54 of the 155 cadets couldn't even finish it. That's insane. So, okay, let's recap. You've got 2 incredibly intense tasks and a group of super fit cadets. You'd have to think that a clear pattern would show up, right? That one specific body type would just dominate. But when the researchers actually crunched all the numbers, the results were, well, they weren't what anyone was expecting. And here's the big surprise, the main takeaway from the study. When they looked at the group as a whole, there were only weak correlations between all those body measurements and how well they did. Basically, the idea of an ideal soldier physique, it just wasn't showing up in the data at all. And get this is a really key point. For that brutal 12-kilometer march, all those physical measurements combined, they only explained about 21.5% of the difference in performance. That means nearly 80% of what made someone faster or slower came from something else entirely, something you can't measure with a tape. But wait, the story doesn't end there. The researchers were smart. They figured there had to be something more going on, so they decided to slice the data in a new way. Instead of looking at everyone all lumped together, they decided to focus on the extremes. So here's what they did. To dig a little deeper, they split the cadets into 4 groups, or quartiles, for each measurement they took. And by comparing the folks in the top 25% against the folks in the bottom 25%, so, for example, the cadets with the most body fat versus those with the least, suddenly some really clear patterns started to pop out. And check this out. When they did that comparison for body fat on the march, wow, a huge difference. The group with the highest body fat was, on average, 7.3 minutes slower. So see, while body fat wasn't a great predictor across the whole group, if you were at that high extreme, it was a definite handicap. This table really lays it all out nicely. You can see that having high body fat or high body mass really slowed people down on the march. But what's interesting is it didn't seem to make a difference in the swim. But then you look at that last row, height, and oh boy, that tells a completely different story. It turns out height was the one measurement that was a good predictor of success in both events. The tallest cadets, They were more than 11 minutes faster on the march, and they performed better in that crazy swim. It really just comes down to simple biomechanics, right? A longer stride means you take fewer steps, and longer arms and legs give you more power and reach in the water. So what are we learning here? It seems like body shape can matter, but really only when you're looking at the extremes. It's definitely not the main thing driving performance. Which, of course, brings us back to that big question. What on earth makes up that missing 80%? What are the other critical factors at play? Well, this study and others like it point to all these crucial hidden drivers of performance. Things like your aerobic capacity, your actual muscular strength, and your technical skill. You know, how good of a swimmer you actually are. And then there are the real intangibles, like mental toughness and just plain old experience. These are all things that a measuring tape and a scale, they're just never going to be able to capture. And really, that brings us to the most important point of all this. As much as we might love the idea of a simple physical formula for success, the reality is just way more complicated. It really suggests that if you're recruiting people based only on their physique, you might be missing out on some of your absolute strongest candidates. Sure, body measurements can give you some clues, but they are nowhere near the whole story. So I want to leave you with this final thought. If a ruler and a scale can't predict elite ability, then what are those hidden factors that truly define the will to succeed? Is it all about mental toughness? Is it technical skill? Or maybe something else entirely we haven't even talked about? What do you think is the secret ingredient for top-tier performance?